Thank you. You may be seated. It's so good to have all of you with us this morning, worshiping with us, especially those of you that are a first-time guest. Welcome. We would love to have everybody fill out the ticket in the seat in front of you. And for those who are regular attenders, those go in the giving boxes in the back. But if you're a first-time guest, we would love to have you take that ticket, fill it out. There's a little table out in the hub. I'll be standing near there after the service. I'd love to meet you. We'd love to give you a free gift bag. So if you're a first-time guest, second-time guest, you've never been out there, make sure you do that today. We welcome our Sioux campus, those down in the chapel, those watching on Folks Listen TV, those listening on the Eagle 101.5 FM. Welcome all of you to our services today. Our affiliate on Bois Blanc Island, we welcome you. Charlevoix, we welcome you. Tall Timber Church in Florida, we welcome you. It's great to have all of you with us. Now, all of you, no matter where you're watching from, we would love to have you be part of our 40-day Renew Focus on Prayer. It begins March 6th. For 40 days leading up to Easter, we're going to send you a short devotional via an email. It's written by a leader in our church, and it's going to focus you on prayer. Now, to be part of that, all you need to do is to text the word RENEW to 989-623-4779. You can even do that right now, wherever you are. Pull out your phone, text the word RENEW, 989-623-4779, and then you'll get a reply with a link. Follow the link. You'll give your name, your email address. You'll be all set to go beginning March 6th. For 40 days leading up to Easter, you'll get a short devotional through an email that will help you to focus, renew your focus on prayer. We had hundreds of people sign up last week. We'd love to see all of you sign up this week if you haven't already. Well, this morning, our study in the life of Abraham takes us into Genesis chapter 19. And Genesis chapter 19 is, without question, the most difficult chapter in the life of Abraham. In fact, I would suggest it's probably the most difficult chapter in all of the Bible. And here's why. Because this chapter includes some very, very heavy subjects. You cannot read through Genesis 19 without seeing homosexuality. You cannot read through Genesis 19 without seeing the subject of rape. You cannot read through Genesis 19 without seeing the subject of incest. And I can guarantee you this morning that there will be times over the next 35 minutes that you feel uncomfortable. In fact, if you go the whole morning and don't feel uncomfortable, I would worry about you. And I can also guarantee you this: as uncomfortable as you might feel listening to this message, I am 10 times more uncomfortable teaching it. But I do believe that God puts what He puts in the Bible for a reason. And I do believe that I would be doing the Bible an injustice if I just skipped over this passage. And I believe as your pastor, I would be doing you a disservice. And so this morning, we're going to read through Genesis 19. We're going to deal with these subjects as they come up. And at the end, I hope to tie it all up with one principle that I think will apply to every one of us. Now, before we begin, though, let me make this statement. For many, many, many years, people who are in positions like mine have used Genesis 19 solely to be a club to beat down the gay community. Now, let me be very clear. I don't want to be misunderstood. I believe that homosexuality is biblically wrong. I believe it is a sin. I believe it is outside of God's will. And though it is seen in this passage, if all you see in this passage is what some would simply call the abomination of homosexuality, if that's all you see, you have missed the main point of the passage. There are some who would say that the reason God destroyed Sodom was because of homosexuality. That is not correct. The reason God destroyed Sodom was because of sin. of which homosexuality was one. In fact, if you take time to read Ezekiel chapter 19, you will discover that at the very heart of the problems in Sodom was the sin of pride and the sin of arrogance. It is not just a passage directed to homosexuals. This is a passage directed to you. This is a passage directed to me. How's that for an introduction? Let's begin reading chapter 19, verse number 1, and let's work our way through this difficult chapter. And here's what the Bible says. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Now let's stop. Who are these two angels? Well, they are two of the three heavenly visitors we saw last week that visited Abraham. And last week I told you, I believe the third visitor was Jesus Christ himself. And these two angels now go on to Sodom. Now, they're in human form, so when they walk into Sodom, they don't look like angels. Those who see them would not say they were angels. They look like two men. And as they walk into the city of Sodom, Lot is sitting at the gate. Now, keep in mind that in that culture, the gate was not a wooden door that sat on a hinge. That was not a gate. That's our culture. In the culture of that day, the gate was the area right inside the main entrance of the city where all the leaders of the city sat and did business. And who is now sitting at the gate, the place where the leaders sit and do business? It is now Lot. Lot is no longer just an inhabitant of Sodom. Lot is now the head of the Chamber of Commerce. He is now a leader within the city. We're going to see a principle all throughout this chapter, and the principle is this. The problem wasn't necessarily that Lot lived in the city of Sodom. The problem was that Lot let the city of Sodom live in him. You see, folks, Sodom in this chapter represents the world. The problem isn't that you and I, as followers of Jesus, live in the world. The problem is that all too often we allow the world to live in us. That's why Jesus said, you are in the world, but do not be of the world. That's why John said, do not love the things of the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, because the things of the world are not consistent with God. Lot has allowed Sodom to live in him. Now keep in mind that 2 Peter would teach us that Lot was righteous. He was a true believer. No doubt he was a worldly believer. Paul would call him a carnal believer. While Abraham was a believer who set his sights on heavenly things, Lot is a believer who sets his sight on worldly things. He's sitting at the gate. And it says when Lot saw these two visitors, he rose to meet them, bowed down with his face to the ground, very common greeting in that culture. And he said, now behold, my lord, small l, please turn aside into your servant's house, spend the night, wash your feet, then you may rise early and go on your way. So what does Lot do with these two strange men, these two visitors, these two foreigners that come into the city? He offers them hospitality. Now we saw this last week with Abraham, did we not? And I told you last week that in the Bible, hospitality is always directed toward strangers. Abraham showed hospitality to these three visitors. That's what Lot's doing. In that culture, it was a valued trait, and you were honored to do it. So Lot extends hospitality. Notice their response. It says, they said, however, no thanks. We'll spend the night in the square. We're just going to stay out here and sleep. No problem. Now look what Lot does. Verse 3. Yet Lot urged them strongly, so they turned aside, entered his house, and ate. So what does Lot do when these visitors say, nah, we'll just sleep out here? Lot says, no. And Lot urges them strongly. Now, why did he do that? It was more than hospitality. You see, Lot understood the depravity of the people in the city. In fact, Peter tells us he was disgusted by a lot of the depravity in the city. He knew what would happen to these men if they stayed out on the street, because it's what would happen to any foreigner who came into the city. So Lot strongly, not just for hospitality's sake, but for their protection, urges them to stay with him, and they do. So they've eaten. It's now time to go to sleep for the night, when Lot hears a ruckus outside. And here's where the passage gets very difficult. Verse 4. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house. Now, here's the key question. How many men were there? Well, it tells us both young and old. Age did not matter. All the men from every quarter of the city. And in Bible times, and still today in that culture, cities were divided into 4 quarters. Jerusalem is to this day. And from every quarter of the city, all the men, young and old, have surrounded Lot's house in the dark of the night, no doubt holding torches. So based on that description, how many men are surrounding the house? Well, I think you could say at the very minimum, dozens, right? All the men of the city. We don't know how many lived in the city. A minimum of dozens, perhaps hundreds, are now surrounding the house. Now, what Lot does next is going to be interesting, because listen to what these men want. Look at verse 5. They called out to Lot. Lot's inside the house, door closed, and they call out to Lot and say, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? We know 2 strangers came into the city. We know you took them into your house. Where are they?" And they say this, "Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them." Now, folks, you can't just scurry around that. This group of men, minimum of dozens, perhaps hundreds, have surrounded the house. And this is exactly what Lot knew would happen to these men had they stayed on the street. He thought he could offer them protection. They are demanding that Lot send those men out so that they can gang rape them. Dozens of men, maybe hundreds of men. Now, ladies and gentlemen, can I just say this? I know that today we often can hear Christians say, we just live here in America in the most morally depraved culture ever. No, we don't. Yes, it's bad. But I still have not seen the city yet in America where every man in the city surrounds a house wanting to gang rape 2 foreign men. That is how evil, the cup of evil, as we saw last week, had been filled in Sodom. Now, how does Lot respond? Well, he's going to do 3 things. The first 2 seem very admirable. Look what he does. Verse 6. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him. Now, at this point, I'm going, go Lot. You talk about courage. Lot goes outside and puts himself between this lustful mob of men and the 2 strangers in his house. That's pretty courageous right there. So far, so good. And I even like what he does next, because he's not just courageous in his actions, he's also courageous in his words. And he says, "Please, my brothers," verse 7, "do not act wickedly." This is wrong. It would be wrong for you to take these men and gang rape them. Please do not do it. Now, at this point, you're going, good job, Lot. Then you get to verse 8. And any good thoughts you had about Lot in verses 6 and 7 come tumbling down. Verse 8. Don't do this wicked thing to these men. Instead, Lot says, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Now, we'll learn later in the chapter they were engaged, but they hadn't been married yet, which in the culture of that day would make them probably 15, 16 years old. I have 2 high school daughters who are virgins. Don't do this wicked thing to these men. Instead, he says, let me bring them out to you. Let me bring my teenage virgin daughters out to you, and you can do to them whatever you like. Just do not harm these men. And I have to be honest. Every time I read that, the dad in me gets so angry. Lot, what are you thinking? Some would say, well, you have to understand that in the culture of that day, if you brought someone into your home for hospitality's sake, a stranger, you had the job, the duty to protect them. Yes, Lot did. But what about the duty he had to protect his daughters? And some would say, but in that culture, you were to protect strangers in your home, even at the risk of your own life. That's right. So what should Lot have done? Not, here are my daughters. Lot should have said, take me instead. How could a man, and this is the Christian in the town, how could this man be willing to give his daughters to that? Folks, think about it with me. If the crowd would have taken Lot's offer and these dozens of men, perhaps hundreds of men, would have gang raped his daughters, there is no doubt in my mind they would have been dead. How could Lot do that? Here's why. Because, folks, when you allow the world to live in you long enough, you will ultimately make decisions that can only be described by one word: insanity. This is a chapter that shows us the insanity of sin. Well, what happens? Fortunately for these 2 teenage girls, the Bible says, beginning in verse number 9, that the crowd doesn't want them. Instead, the mob says to Lot, stand aside. We want those men. Furthermore, they said, speaking of Lot, this one came to us as an alien. He wasn't born here in Sodom. He came into this town as a stranger. And now he's acting like a judge. You know, some things don't change over the course of time. To this day, whenever sin is pointed out, the natural response is, don't you judge me. And that's exactly what these men did. And then they said to Lot, stand aside or we'll treat you worse than those men. When we're done with them, we'll do the same to you. Now, it says they pressed hard against Lot and they came near to break the door in. This mob is getting violent. Fortunately for Lot, fortunately for his daughters, these aren't just 2 strangers in the house. These are 2 angels. And we see the power of these angels as we keep reading. It says, but the men, the angels, verse 10, reached out their hands, brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. They rescue Lot. And then it says, they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great. So what do these angels do? They go into action. Don't underestimate the power of an angel, folks. In the Old Testament, you'll read a story where one angel killed 185,000 people. Here's two angels. They got this covered. They pull Lot in and they strike everyone at the door, the whole mob, with blindness. Now, wouldn't you think if you're part of the mob, wouldn't you think that if suddenly you're blind, you're wanting to find your way home? But look what the mob does. It says, they wearied themselves still trying to find the doorway. Even now, blind, they still want those men. Why? Because of the insanity of sin. Go down to verse number 12 and look what happens. The two men said to Lot, whom else have you here? A son-in-law, your sons, daughters, whoever it is. Bring them out of the place. Now note this, folks. This is the first of 4 times that these angels are going to say to Lot, you and your family need to get out of here. You need to escape the city. 4 different times. Lot will not respond to any of these admonitions. Let's keep reading. Why do you need to leave? Verse 13, the angels say, for we're about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before the Lord sent us here to destroy it. And we know the angels can do that. And obviously Lot knows their power. He just watched them blind that whole mob. So what does Lot do? Verse 14, he went out, he spoke to his sons-in-law. So those 2 daughters he had are engaged to these other men. This just obviously hasn't been consummated yet. And they were about to marry his daughters. And he said, up, get out of this place. The Lord's going to destroy it. So Lot seems to be repeating the command of the angels. But look at the response of these 2 men who are soon to be his sons-in-law. It says he appeared to them to be jesting. Now, what does that tell me? It tells me that though Lot was a believer, he had so allowed Sodom to live in his heart that he had no spiritual influence in this city. He did not even have influence over his own family. His son-in-laws did not take his spiritual admonition seriously. We will see that his wife will not take it seriously. And at the end of the chapter, we will see that his daughters have not taken it seriously either. As we keep reading in verse number 15, morning dawns, and the angels urge Lot a second time, up, take your wife, your 2 daughters, get out of here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. Now, put yourself in Lot's sandals. Think of the night you've just had. There's a mob at your door threatening to kill you and do other things to you. These angels are in your house. They have blinded that mob. They have told you not once, but twice, you and your family need to get out of here. We're going to destroy the city. Now, folks, at this point, if you're Lot, what are you doing? I would hope you're running, right? You're running away from that city as fast as you can go. The next words boggle my mind. Look at it in verse 16. After the second admonition, get out of the city or you will be swept away with the punishment. But Lot, what? Hesitated. Why? Why would you hesitate? Because Lot was not just living in the city. He was allowing Sodom to live in him. His thinking was now messed up. Every decision he was making could only be defined by the word insanity. So you know what these angels have to do? Keep reading. So the men, those 2 angels, seized his hand, the hand of his wife, the hands of his daughters, and for the compassion of the Lord was upon them, and they brought them out of the city. The angels literally had to drag them out of the city. Can you believe it? They've already told him twice, we're going to destroy it. You know how evil it is. God sent us here to save you. Get out of the city. Lot hesitates. They have to drag him out of the city. Why? Because Lot wasn't just living in Sodom. Sodom was now living in Lot. And when they drag him out of the city, here's what they say, verse 17. When they brought them outside, they said, escape for your life. That's the third time the angels have told him to escape, and he still hasn't gone. Then they give some other commands. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. They would have to run through the Jordan Valley to get to the mountains. Don't stay in the valley. Escape to the mountains or you'll be swept away. Now at that point, do you not think it's a good idea for Lot to start running? But he still doesn't. Why? Because Sodom was living in him. And his thinking was marred. So look what he does. Verse 18. But Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight. You've magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. He's buttering up the angels. I don't think you can butter up angels, but he's trying. He says, but I can't escape to the mountains. Disaster will overtake me if you send me. I can't live in a cave. Now behold, there's a town right over there. It's near enough to flee to. It's a very small town. Please let me go there instead, that my life will be saved. Can you believe this guy? Oh, God, angels, really? Do I have to go live in the mountains? I'm a city boy. I can't live in the mountains. I can't live in a cave. I need at least a little bit of a city. And if I can't have Sodom, can I go to that little city over there? The insanity of sin. We also now see the mercy of God because look, it says, verse 21, the angel said to Lot, behold, we'll grant you this request, not to overthrow the town which you've spoken. Hurry, here's the fourth time, hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you get there. In other words, they had orders, and their orders were to destroy the city, but not until Lot was safe. I love the fact of some lessons we learn. The one lesson we learn is this, listen, every decision of God is right, even his decisions regarding judgment. They're always right. But I love the fact that all through Scripture, before God sends judgment, he separates the righteous from the unrighteous. He did Lot. Did Lot deserve it? Not on your life. He did Noah. So finally, Lot leaves. Look at verse 23. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to that little city Zoar. And the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire out of heaven. He overthrew the cities, all the valley, all the inhabitants, and what grew on the ground. But look at verse 26. But Lot's wife from behind him looked back and became a pillar of salt. Folks, this wasn't the look of curiosity. This wasn't slowing your car down because there's an accident on the other side of the highway. This was a look back longing for the city. Folks, be very, very careful. Because one of the greatest lies that Satan will tell you when it comes to your sin is this: just take one more look. Well, the scene is going to shift in a moment to Abraham, but first, let me just point out that in Luke 17, Jesus uses this event to speak of what it will be like in the end times when God judges the world for their sin. We don't have time to read that. You can read it on your own. But let's pick it up in verse 27. When Abraham went to bed the night before, he had just got done negotiating with God. We saw that last week. And God had agreed that if 10 righteous people were found in the city, he would delay judgment. Why did Abraham do that negotiation? Because he knew Lot lived in the city. He did not want Lot destroyed. And when Abraham went to bed that night, he probably thought, I think we're okay. Surely there's 10 righteous people in the city. Well, we come to learn there wasn't even 5. And when Abraham wakes up the next morning, we pick up the story in verse 27. Now Abraham arose early in the morning. He went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. I love that. Why did God show mercy to Lot? Was it because Lot deserved it? No, not this rascal. Do you know why he showed mercy to Lot? Because of Abraham. Because Abraham had been interceding for him. God saved Lot, not because of what Lot had done. God saved Lot because of what Abraham had done for Lot. Isn't that a beautiful picture of salvation today? Folks, listen, God didn't save me because of anything I did. God saved me because of what Jesus did for me when he died to pay the penalty for my sin. The rest of the chapter we don't have time to read through, but I want to tell you what happens. And as I tell you what happens, I hope you'll take time on your own to read it. But if you think it has been disturbing up until now, it gets even more disturbing. For some reason, Lot doesn't stay in the city of Zoar. He and his daughters end up going and living in the wilderness, in a cave, the place he didn't want to be. It's just the 3 of them in that cave. The daughters have a conversation. And in the conversation, they say, there is no man around here in this wilderness that we can have sex with. There's no man in this wilderness that can give us children. All we have is Dad. And Dad's getting pretty old, so if we're going to act, we better act quick. And the Bible teaches us that they got their dad very, very, very drunk. So drunk he did not remember. And that night, the oldest daughter went in and had sex with her dad and got pregnant. The next day, she looked at her younger sister and said, it's your turn. And that night, they got Lot drunk again. And the younger daughter went in and had sex with her dad and got pregnant. And when you read the conversation, it almost appears like to these 2 teenage daughters, 15, 16 years old, that this was no big deal. And probably in their thinking it wasn't. And here's why. Because they had lived all their life where? In Sodom. And folks, we've already seen that when it came to sexual perversion, Sodom had it all. My guess would be that incest ran rampant in that city. And though it may not have occurred with Lot and his daughters, I'm sure all their friends spoke very openly about it. To them, it was no big deal. In fact, they almost brag about it. How do we know that? Because in the text you will read that the oldest daughter will name her son Moab. Do you know what the name Moab means? It literally means from father. She basically names him, my father is his dad. The younger daughter names her son Ben-Ami, which literally means son of my kinsman. By naming them, they're almost bragging of the incestuous relationship. And then suddenly, the curtain goes down on Lot's life. It's the last time he's mentioned in the book of Genesis. That's what Lot will be forever remembered for. As I thought about that this week, and I put that together with Peter's writings, it said Lot was a true believer, a righteous man. That tells me Lot will be in heaven, even though he made such horrible mistakes. And you know what that told me? Well, think about it. Could you imagine being Lot in heaven, and every single person who's there has read your story? I think if you're Lot, you'd be walking around heaven like this, wouldn't you? Hey, are you Lot? No, I'm Larry. You know what it tells me? Folks, listen. In heaven, you will not be known for your mistakes. In heaven, you will not be known for your guilt. In heaven, you will only be seen through the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Wow, I can't wait for heaven. So what is the main principle we need to learn from this chapter about the insanity of sin? I would say the main principle is this. Folks, listen. Sin is always a big deal. And I know we live in a culture today, moving towards a culture of Sodom, where sin's no big deal. It seems like even in the church, it's no big deal. Sleep with who you want to sleep with. Divorce who you want to divorce. Have an affair with who you want to have an affair with. Cheat with whoever you want to cheat with. Sin is always a big deal. Think about it. How did Lot get to this point? That he would make the decisions we saw him make today. It didn't happen overnight. Do you know when Genesis chapter 19 started? Back in Genesis chapter 13. Remember when Abraham came to Lot and said, okay, we need to separate. Lot, you pick a direction, I'll go the opposite. Remember what Lot did? He looked and he saw Sodom. And even though he knew it was wicked and evil, he saw the lush valley leading up to it. He saw the potential for profit. And that look began the whole thing. The next thing we know, he has now pitched his tent as close to Sodom as he could get it. And then that's not it. The next thing we learn about him is he's living inside the city. And even when God tries to get his attention and sends an invading force and they take him captive as a slave and Abraham goes and rescues him, what does Lot do? He goes right back to the world. He goes right back to Sodom. And the next time we see him, he is a leader in this city. Sodom was living in him. And this morning, I know I'm talking to many people at our Gaylord campus, at our Sioux campus, our online campus, TV, radio. I'm talking to many believers who are living somewhere between Genesis chapter 13 and Genesis chapter 19. You've already started down that path. You have become more focused on what the world offers than what God offers. You have pitched your tent as close to the world as you can get it. Some of you have gone right over and are just indulging in it. Some of you are beginning to make some very, very, very difficult, insane decisions. And I want to say to you what those angels said 4 different times. Flee, run, because sin is always a big deal. Would you stand with me, please, for prayer? With our heads bowed and our eyes closed. Are you living in between Genesis 13 and 19? Have you started that path? A path that will ultimately end in decisions you making being nothing short of insane. The good news is there's still time for you to turn around. When the angels told Lot to run, he hesitated. Today, I believe that God is telling some of you, you need to run. You need to run away from that sin. You need to run away from that relationship. You need to run away from that thinking. You need to run away from that action. And my prayer for you is that, like Lot, you will not hesitate. Today, God offers you his mercy. And his mercy is more. It's more than the sin that you're living in. And my prayer today is that in your heart, you will run. So, Father, it's a tough chapter. But I'm so glad you put it in the Bible. We need these kind of wake-up calls. And I know this wasn't a feel-good message. We're going to walk out of here skipping. And that wasn't today. But my prayer, God, is for that one person who's listening right now who is living between Genesis 13 and 19. My prayer is that they will hear your voice. They will respond to your admonition to flee, and they will experience your mercy. I thank you that your mercy is available today. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.